Hi, my name's Josh Coonrad, and I wrote this book, October 31st, 1985, Six Stories of Halloween. I decided to put together a little YouTube video to talk a little bit about the book and some of my influences. I'm going to do a couple of these. But one of the things I've heard is when people first write new books, one of the things people are most interested in is what inspired and what things they found interesting, what led to kind of the writing that they did. So I just want to tell you a little bit about some of the different types of authors and different books that inspired it. So the first thing that I wanted to throw out there, which of course I don't have a hard copy of around here, was the Goosebumps books. I know a lot of you probably grew up on those. A funny thing happened with my age group, I felt like, and this might just be because I'm a weirdo, but I know a lot of us grew up on the Goosebumps books, even though they were meant for people slightly younger than us. So, I know me and my friends were reading the wonderfully trashy R.L. Stine Fear Street novels, which were much more violent and a little bit more perverse than the Goosebumps books were. But man, when those Goosebumps books came out, they were at Walmart, they were at Kmart, they were at Target, every grocery store, and they just had such cool titles that it was hard not to be interested in kind of what they were doing. And they were super fast, easy, simple reads. And no matter what kind of horror you were in, there seemed to be some story about it. So it didn't matter if you were scared of marionettes, if you were scared of werewolves, if you were scared of haunted houses or vampires. There was a Goosebumps book out there for everyone. October 31st, 1985 skews a little bit older than that. There are kind of some darker stories and some darker moments, but it'd be a lie to say that when I was writing it, I didn't think back to reading some of the Goosebumps books and kind of the influence they might have had on me when I was growing up. A few other books I thought that I might throw out there. First one is Joe Hill's 20th Century Ghosts. If you've never read anything by Joe Hill, well, first, he's Stephen King's son, which I'm sure he just loves to constantly be introduced as. But he's also one of probably the most important horror writers right now. He's done books like Horns and Nosferatu. But this is one of his first books, and I remember reading it right before I started working on my dissertation project that I did when I was in graduate school. The first story in there is called Best New Fiction, and it's about a guy who works for a horror literary journal, and he's trying to find the best horror pieces that he can, and in trying to track down a person who wrote a horror story that really deeply impacted him, he ends up in a terrible, terrible situation. I read this right before I went to work with the Dark Carnival group, who ran a film festival in Bloomington. And I worked with them and kind of studied the film festival and helped with it, and then worked a little bit with some of the films that they made after that, like Found. Actually, I didn't come on until Headless. But I remember reading that story and being fascinated by it and being slightly worried that when I met the Dark Carnival people, they were going to kill me. They did not. They turned out to be really awesome, amazing, wonderful people that let me work with their festival and their films and have an amazing time doing so. But that was not just a story that I remember because of the impact it had on me at the moment, but reading Joe Hill's short stories was something that made me stop and go, wait a second, I've written short stories in the past, but I don't think I've pushed on kind of the format and thought about what I could do with it in the way that I really felt like he did. It's funny because Stephen King's got a million short story books, and he's a great short story writer, but I don't know what it is about Joe Hill's books in particular or his short stories that really resonated with me and pushed me to start writing short fiction again. But there's some really cool things in there, but that first one, Best New Fiction, it had an impact on me. I'd be curious if it has the same one on you. Another one that I wanted to throw out there just because I read it a couple years ago. I'd thought about reading it for a while, and then Maggie actually got it for me for, I can't remember if it was my birthday. I think it might have been. But this is a really popular horror book about a small town that is kind of haunted by this ghostly presence that can only extend so far out into the town, which you're thinking, great, I can just leave the town and get away from the ghost. But if you leave the space in which this ghost can move, you will find yourself wanting to end your life. It's a really kind of disturbing intersection of horror and science fiction. But if you like kind of an interesting twist on a ghost story and taking that idea of a gothic tale and seeing how far you can kind of push it forward in a new way, it's a really interesting book. It was really popular before it was translated into English. I guess there's been some shifts with how they left the conclusion, but a lot of times when that happens, when things get translated for Americans and English-speaking audiences, they kind of let's say, soften the conclusion a little bit. They do not in this one. So just a heads up, it's a dark book, but it's exciting, it's interesting, and it says a lot of, or it's got a lot of great examples and ideas about kind of groupthink right now, kind of some ideas and questions that might resonate with where we are as a culture. So, and again, just I really kind of like that gothic feel, that idea of taking a haunted house story, a ghost story, and seeing what else you can do with it. This might not strike many people as a horror book, but I just wanted to throw it out there. Gary Larson's The Curse of Madam C. If you've read this, it's a Far Side collection with mainly Far Side jokes, but it starts with such a wonderfully absurd Far Side style little horror story about how Gary Larson becomes the Gary Larson that we know and love. If you haven't gone back and read The Far Side in a while, do it. Also on YouTube, if you want to check this out, you might remember that in the 90s there was a special where they animated Far Side cartoons, put them together, and then put it on TV as a special on Fox when Fox used to do really cool Halloween stuff. It probably actually ran with a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. That's actually up on YouTube now, so if that's something you're interested in, if you remember the Far Side, check that out. And if you haven't read the first few pages of The Curse of Madam C in a while, go back and do that. It's really enjoyable. And the final one that I thought that I would throw out there, it's not necessarily something that's inspired me just now because it's actually what I'm in the middle of reading, because I always do a Halloween read at the beginning or throughout October of every year, is Stephen Graham Jones' The Only Good Indians. I don't want to say too much about this. It's a really beloved novel right now. It's gotten wonderful reviews. I think it just came out a little bit earlier this year, maybe in July. But I'd read another one of his books a few years ago called Mongrels. And it's one of those horror books that is so rich in its characterization that I found myself for, about the month that I was reading it, a few pages before bed every night, being so concerned about where this family was and what kind of they were going through. And it helped me realize something, because there's a cliche sometimes that I hate that people say about horror. And it's the idea that horror should just be a metaphor for something else. Horror can often be a metaphor for something else, and a lot of the most interesting horror has real-life ideas and real-life tensions and fears kind of at its core. One thing that's kind of turned into, though, is people wanting to turn horror books into just kind of really, really on-the-nose, straightforward metaphors and of melodramatic stories where the ghost is just a really obvious representation of something else, and it drives me bonkers. I love horror, and I think it should speak to ideas, but when it just turns into this thing where it's really bluntly speaking about something else to the point that you don't feel like you're reading or watching a horror narrative anymore, I just can't enjoy that in the same way. But the thing about The Only Good Indians and his previous book, Mongrels, one of the things that impacts me so much is not the idea of, hey, let's just take these characters and make a statement about something else using horror, but when you draw your characters so well and so deeply that the horror says something about their situation, but I'm just so drawn into the story because of how much I come to understand and care about those people and what they're going through in life in a current moment. And what happens in The Only Good Indians is tragic. It's not a happy, fun horror book, so just a heads up about that. But it's fascinating to me, and it says kind of interesting things about kind of indigenous American culture and the thing that a lot of people in indigenous American cultures go through right now, again, kind of through that lens of horror. But not in a way that was so on the nose that I could see where it's coming. In fact, I've still got about 100 pages of it left, and I'm really curious where it's going to wrap up. So, So those are just a few recommendations or inspirations from me to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, a little bit about the book that I just wrote. If you're interested in potentially reading October 31st, 1985, you can find it on Amazon, or you can contact me and I can send you a copy of it. Just email me at joshuakunrad@gmail.com. So, but no matter what, I hope you're finding something spooky and creepy and horror-ish to enjoy over the course of October, as everyone should. Oh, and before we wrap up, I just wanted to make sure that I shared my Mothman Festival 2018 shirt, which is one of the more enjoyable experiences I had. Went to this festival with Josh Vasquez a couple years ago to see it for the first time. Had a blast. So here's hoping you find something cool, fun, spooky to do like that this month. And yeah, that's it for me from now.